Well, Merry Christmas. My name's Zack Snyder, and you're listening to the Blackbar podcast.
New
Today
costumes
I'm joined
every week
by Caleb and Nick, and apparently I've devolved into clothes and prop comedy. So I don't know why these guys did not wear anything seasonal, like just production black and our own merch.
Listen.
Come on, guys.
If you've heard the memes on TikTok and stuff, I brought myself a seasonal little red truck hauling a Christmas tree, and that's going to be right here, just out of frame.
I don't think either Caleb
my
or
seasonal
Nick,
decoration.
Caleb or I have heard that or seen that trend. So
I'm familiar with it. I just don't want to give Nick the pleasure of knowing that I did. Also, I feel like if you're surprised that I've not dressed up for this, then that's more on you not knowing me very well than anything.
What can I say? I'm a hopeful romantic, and my hope is that one day both of you will embrace dressing up based upon the seasonal activities going on. But regardless, I'm going to have this hat on as long as I can, but I'm already getting very warm, so I'll take it off at some point. But for those that are watching today on the podcast, we're going to gift you, 3 topics today as we talk about SAG-AFTRA strike resolutions, and that Instagram updated its algorithm again, and why church attendance is declining, and what in the heck our church creatives going to do about it. Gentlemen, how are we doing today, even though both of you are Grinches?
Doing good. I have my little red truck hauling a Christmas tree. How does that make me a Grinch?
I'm fine. I will redefine your Grinch personality if you give it to me.
I love that. Oh my gosh.
We already made a 9.5 foot
foot.
pole joke before this episode started. So
that is very true.
If only we could get like a little counter on the bottom of the screen that, I hear the music restarting.
That wasn't meant to start up again. That was interesting.
Can we get like a little counter on the bottom of the screen that like tallies Christmas jokes?
Sure, we'll do it in post.
Definitely
We'll
could
do it in
have
post.
if you asked me 3 hours ago, but you can't have one now.
Well, guys, I don't know if you can see, we've got a new, for those that are watching on YouTube, we've got a new layout that we're experimenting with. As a Blackbar, always trying something new. If it ain't broke, make it better. So for those that are listening on the podcast, we've got this beautiful new look. Our faces are shining and the boxes are gleaming, and it's all wrapped up for the Christmas season like a beautiful package.
Yeah.
Amen.
It took a few hours to put together, but it's a lot better on the back end. It's easier to swap things out and everything. I'm happy with it.
You guys are giving me nothing to work with today. You really are Grinches. Wake up. Enjoy the Christmas spirit and the joy of the land that we're within. We're in a happy season, guys. All right, whatever.
Jonathan Yepes in chat says he loves the look, guys.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate it. Thank you. We're going to bring Jonathan on so that he can bring some life to the episode today. On that note, Caleb, why don't you bring us into the first episode, or the first topic today? What are we talking about? What are the details? We got juicy updates.
Yeah, we're talking about the SAG-AFTRA strike resolution. We talked about this, if I remember correctly, episode 1 or 2 of season
episode
2.
1. Yeah.
And we didn't get into any drama or trouble with various members of our community talking about strikes openly and unions. But the strike has come to a close. The writers were on strike for a minute. They finished their strike a while ago. Now the actors have signed this thing. And our connections in the industry tell us that maybe not everybody's super pumped about the signing of the super thing and sort of the deal they ended up with.
Connections in the industry.
Our connections. We don't know any actors. We do know some film people, but not any actors, to be clear. But we wanted to go over some of the provisions specifically as it relates to AI and talk about maybe some of the wider implications of what this could mean in many industries, including especially our industry. So as it relates to AI, there were a handful of things that the actors are excited about that got passed through in this deal that they were working through. Yeah. So number one, the big conversation is about digital replicas. So going in, getting sort of your body, face, whatever scanned, and then them using AI to be able to use that likeness in the future to make you say things you didn't say, to be in the background of films you were never in, that sort of deal. So originally, actors were only going to be paid for the day that it took to scan their body and their face.
Ridiculous.
That is no longer going to be the case.
Yep.
They are now going to be paid for the amount of days they would have worked whenever their likeness is being used.
Yeah.
Which that's a win. That's a good thing. Also,
I feel that's a win.
Previously there were not going to be any residuals for actors that were featured only with digital replication. So now if your likeness is being used in something and that something makes money, you make some money on top of that, which is probably a good idea. The background, I talked about that one. Consent for digital replicas to be used is required.
Yes.
Previously someone could scan you and then, the studio that owns your likeness or owns a copy of it at least could use it in perpetuity on whatever things they want. Now you at least have to give approval. And the last sort of big thing is one of the other concerns is people, the studios will take like 5 or 6 different actors and sort of amalgamate them together into a new actor and then be able to do whatever they want with that, right? So there are provisions specifically that they're not allowed to do that. But there are some problems in that cover. So those are sort of the wins that they're sort of excited about.
Yeah, and I want to take a quick second. I feel like, maybe this is my fault for hopping in comment sections, but I feel like one of the prevailing arguments was like, oh, actors, like big actors, why are they complaining about this? Why are they joining in on these strikes? Like, they're making so much money. They're not like us. But we have a mutual friend in the industry, and one of the things that he was saying was that if the actors are no longer being present, like if they're not there, then you're losing the need for prop folks. You're losing the need for people to do makeup and hair. You're losing the people to do, pretty much everything that involves a live actor setting. Like you're essentially dismantling the film industry, which I think is one of the hardest conversations about this, because there's so many tools that even eke through this agreement that still, I think, will continue to affect change in the industry in the long term. So I think it's important to remember that this singular topic is not just impacting one person. It's like having if they did not come to the agreement that they're at, it could have ripple implications that would have fully transformed the industry. And I think the industry is still going to transform and change. Like we talk about that for church media. It's always growing and changing, and we have to either decide to hop on or we're going to get left behind. So I think there's an allowance there that's okay, but also there's a lot of worries. And Caleb, you were saying that there's some implications that are still kind of eking through. So,
the resolution was passed, which they got a majority vote among the actors. Now, how much of that is because they're super excited about the deal, and how much of it is they haven't worked in like 150 days or something?
Yeah, one of the longest strikes, right? Not the longest, but it was up there.
Yeah. So to some extent, they kind of had to sign it. If some of them were losing their houses, like this is a bad deal. So the criticisms of the agreement that have come about, number one, AI is moving very fast. So it's hard to sign any sort of resolution right now that's going to be any sort of real blanket protection to new advancements in technology that are going to appear in the next, month, year,
100%.
Let alone 3 years.
Yeah.
And many actors, understandably speaking, don't want synthetic sort of replicas at all. They don't want the people's always going to be the best, option, whatever.
I believe replicant is the correct terminology based on Blade Runner. Please use correct terminology for.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna.
That wasn't a Christmas reference, Zach. Missed opportunity.
There, in regards to specifically for the consent for digital replicas to be used into the future, there was one provision in there that specifically says, unless a reasonably specific future use case is provided. An example that I heard is like, okay, if Marvel is scanning you, they could say, okay, we're going to make the next 3 Doctor Strange movies. We're signing you in to be in those movies. That would be reasonably specific.
Sure.
But what if Doctor Strange is in the next, like, you know, Infinity War type thing? Is that now a Doctor Strange movie? And like, so there's ways of.
What if there's an Avengers Christmas special? Like, does that qualify? That's no longer a Doctor Strange movie.
There are concerns about reasonably specific for projects that may or may not still be in planning, especially when you haven't heard or seen the script or the intent. That could be problematic.
Sure,
consent is a big deal, for sure. The complexities regarding specifically tracking the digital likeness in regards to the amalgamation. So like the idea of taking 5 or 6 different actors and smashing them into a new person, and then you've got a free brand new person you can use whatever. It's kind of hard to prove when that's been done, right? And especially realistically, we're not talking about 5 or 6. We're talking about everyone they've ever scanned. Like this is stuff that we can already do in Midjourney. If they scan hundreds of people and then or thousands even, and then using the AI technology, like, okay, I would like a dude that is, you know, 5'10" and is a redhead and he weighs this, like, and of this descent, like that's totally going to be a thing eventually, just creating people from nothing. And technically if your likeness was used in the training data, that would count here. But there's no real way to know for sure. There's no good way to prove it. The deal says literally like, hey, if you think that your likeness has been used to make an amalgamation, to talk to SAG-AFTRA and they will find out and they'll research it or whatever.
I mean, that's so hard to navigate.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you look at like things in the industry right now. So like the one I can think of like most recently was like The Last of Us, right? Elliot Page had claimed that Naughty Dog used their likeness as the literal model for the character, and whether or not that's true, I don't remember the outcome of that situation, but that's like specifically this person looks like me. So how the heck do you pull that from an amalgamation? And that's, I really hate to say it, but if money is involved and there's a way to save money, I feel like the film industry is going to find a way around that in the long term.
Right.
Which is just a whole mess.
There's a lot of fear specifically around the union SAG-AFTRA not being able to handle what could be a ridiculous volume of like research requests to find out like, hey, this guy looks kind of like he has my eyes and he's in the background of the shot for like 3 seconds. I'm like, how on earth is that ever going to work?
It's really hard.
The last thing is compared to the Writers Guild, sort of the deal they got some pretty rock solid AI provisions. The actors didn't get as good in regards to that. So there's they feel like they could have gotten a better deal, but also it's been 150 days and they haven't had any work. So we made good things. It progressed, but maybe not enough.
There's compromises that had to be made for sure.
Bittersweet for sure.
So, we've been talking, we started out the year with this whole episode. We're kind of talking about year end stuff. So guys, that feels like a little bit of a bookend on the situation. Maybe not the tightest bow, maybe not the nicest looking present. Got to keep the Christmas trees coming. But at least there's some conclusion, which thankfully for our friends and for the people that we enjoy consuming media from, they are able to get back to work. So excited for that. Excited that there was some union success. I think what I want to just bring out of this conversation is like why it's good for church creatives and media creatives to be aware of this, but like what is the direct implication? I think I mentioned briefly like where industries can make more money or where they can stretch more things out of situations. There are instances in which you see organizations that are willing to support and do things well within their company and the stuff that they're creating, but there's other people that aren't, and I think we're going to see a similar reality in our own situations and in churches and in structures. There's a reality where to some extent we're operating on business models. And I think what I am starting to see is I hope that the church doesn't take the same approach that some of these companies and organizations are taking when it comes to AI provisions with actors, because I don't know how many churches are actually working with actors, but churches are working with creators, and more and more AI tools are kind of breaking out into the market. So like, what do you guys think the direct comparison is that we can learn from this topic for that?
Yeah, I definitely think like, okay, so I'm a graphic designer and I've, a long time lots of years of experience in doing graphic design, and I don't feel any sort of qualms about using Midjourney or these other image generation bots to assist in my, graphic design work that I'm already going to be doing. And it saved me the time of having to look for a stock photo or a specific asset or something like that. But if I was, still working for a church and my boss came to me and was showing me Midjourney, I was like, hey, this thing looks really cool. Like, we have 2 or 3 different people that are employed at the church doing graphic design. Do we still need 2 or 3? Because we could just use the bot. And realistic graphic design is just one thing in the world of AI that AI can help theoretically churches with. Obviously, the entire field of like administration, like admins and whatnot, basic communication back and forth.
Yes.
ChatGPT can handle a lot of sort of that basic communication, and even being able to scan your calendar and make predictions based on that and whatnot. I mean, it can write content in terms of Bible studies. That's possibly work pastors could be doing. And I think there's a concern in my mind, being, I guess, more like from a labor-minded perspective, that there will be a temptation, if not already soon enough, for many churches to start thinking about replacing existing employees with artificial intelligence, because ChatGPT is $15 a month, $20 a month.
What an age we live in that statement was just made, and it could be reality. Like,
so I think it's like an honest conversation. Like, it should be worth talking about. Do churches that, they are churches, they are ministry, they're also a business that have limited income coming in, limited resources. Do they have an obligation to hold on to existing positions with real live human beings as employees that could theoretically be done for less money using artificial intelligence?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's actually a conversation that we had a long time ago now, Caleb. Do you remember Vive Media?
Yeah. Yep.
They made it so that like you could have all media created by them for like $700 a month. And I remember that was initially a conversation where like, how can we justify having, at that time when we were at Grand Rapids First, a department of 5 people, you're paying all these salaries when this company is saying, I can do everything for $700 a month. Now, Vive ended up being not a legitimate company, and there are a lot of things
great
that
on the business side. You can go.
Go Google it. But I mean, I feel like it's somewhat of a similar conversation here, even that like initially, I would say that I feel like churches do have an obligation to make sure they're not just replacing their employees with AI substitutes. But if that was an option that they ran down, in a similar way, I feel like you might see, at least in the creative world, people switching to, instead of having a team of 5, maybe a team of a few, and then that team working with outside companies to create media or work with AI to make something close enough that they can then make as a permanent feature.
Yeah, I mean, if I can bring like a thought, like I think there's nothing wrong with, like, we've used the terminology ready-made media for companies like a Vive, and I think that they're already using AI tools within those companies to help achieve the lofty number of content requests that they have coming in. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. Just like Caleb, you said, you use it for your own content and have no moral conviction against that. I think what's important to recognize, what neither AI nor ready-made media companies do necessarily on the front end, is they don't have the culture of your church in mind. So like my church, we use a graphic design company, external one. They've been helpful for us. But what we realize is that sometimes there's instances in which our own people on staff, people within our teams, even volunteers, have the capacity, they have the drive, and they have the commitment to the mission of our organization, that they're able to bring a different perspective to the design of that content than an external company might be. The external companies, the AI tools, they aren't sitting in our meetings listening to our culture. They aren't just listening to the context in which we're creating. They're simply giving a response to something that is a we have to spend time generating that request. And I think that that's an advantage that you'll never really you'll never really be able to achieve if you go another route, specifically when it comes to AI. I think if you're training someone to equip and use those tools like we continue to encourage people to do, I think that's going to be more of a sweet spot. I think something else to watch out for, especially for churches that have young audiences, or again, do you have a good volunteer culture, a good healthy volunteer culture in your church, and do you have people that are coming around you that are interested in what you're doing? I think later on in today's conversation we'll be talking about some of the reasons church attendance is declining, and one of the reasons, not to get too much into it, but there are people in leadership that are not passing the responsibilities and the calls and the tasks onto the next person. So like as media folks, are there people around us? Are there like youth students? Are there volunteers? Are there people who are saying, hey, I want to do more, that we're equipping and training to be able to navigate AI tools, to be able to navigate creative processes, and then to kind of blend in that sweet spot? Like I think in a lot of ways, that would be my first, like if I'm looking to navigate my heavy workload, that's going to be the first lens that I put on, right? At least for myself. Do I have people around me that I can equip to help grow my industry or my team that I'm a part of? Like that is one of the first lenses I'm putting on. It doesn't have to be like AI and training volunteers doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. However, I do think there's a moral obligation if your staff is saying, hey, how do we cut more people and do more work? That to me is just a red flag. And I hope that there aren't churches that are out there listening that like that's their first default, because of course we're going to say that's terrible. Like, hey, we pay full-time and benefits to our graphic designer. Couldn't AI do that? Like that's a red flag right there, my friend.
Unfortunately, we live in a fallen world, and that includes the churches. And without a doubt, there are churches that are going to pull that kind of stuff.
Sure.
What I've thought about this topic over the past few days, my 2 points that I were going to make, Troy and Greg made both of them.
Nice.
I was going to say that's great.
Troy, I absolutely agree. If we had gone, in this hypothetical situation, my boss said, hey, we don't need the graphic designers anymore, I'll just make the stuff. There's no question that a graphic designer equipped with something like Midjourney is going to be able to make better stuff than someone who doesn't know any graphic design. And because it's about taste. We've talked, I don't know how many times now, about skills. And we've talked about taste. And those are two different things that you need to work on. And graphic designers, hopefully, if you're getting paid for it professionally, you have an amount of taste that is going to allow you to be able to create content that's a higher quality, more engaging, more effective than someone without. So that across the board, an administrative assistant empowered with ChatGPT is always going to be more effective than, that person's boss with ChatGPT to replace them. Just that, I think I can say that as a blanket statement, feel comfortable with that. And then I 100% agree from Greg's perspective. If anyone should be setting an example on putting human beings first, I feel like the church should be the one to do it. Being the most the best and most human positive end to the conversation, regardless of the expense, as Greg put it, I think is a great way of putting it.
Let's just bring on the chat today, man. They're just,
if we as a church want to be able to continue to improve and continue to have the answers for the problem that the culture is currently experiencing. Not that we do an awesome job of that, generally speaking. This could be an area where we can take that stance of no, we're going to put our people first. And if they want to use AI to do more, to do better at their jobs, fantastic, right?
Yeah.
But replacing people with that, I think that can't be what we're supposed to be doing as church. That can't be the right direction, right? Ministry is not just what you as a church staff do to the people who attend. It's also what you as the church staff do to the other members of your staff. And that is not how Jesus would want us to be behaving with any of them, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, there's a certain amount that perhaps this is a bit of a spicy thing to say, but in this hypothetical scenario that we've created, where a pastoral team, leadership team is looking for opportunities to save money by removing personnel and replacing them with AI. I feel there's been enough conversations I've been a part of where people have said, well, you can't just use ChatGPT to write a sermon, right? It's not, that's not going to work. You need to make sure the Spirit is involved. You need to, it's all the different reasons why ChatGPT might not be able to replace a sermon. I feel like if we're going to apply that logic to our pastoral staff, our teaching staff, where AI can't just replace your teachers and preachers who are writing the sermons, we have to also use those considerations looking at all the other positions that we have as well, from the facilities team to executive leadership team. There, even with administrative stuff, as Caleb, you've pointed out to conversations we've had recently, that there's a lot of tools that could almost eliminate the need for an administrator in some senses. But yeah, if we're going to use the specifically in this case scenario where a pastor cannot be substituted for ChatGPT, we should use that same logic across the line everywhere else.
Now that's something. I want to go to a church with an AI pastor.
I don't know. I want to see a church with AI janitors. That's what I'm hearing, Nick. Something about AI janitors. Just like that's what I'm going to start cheering for.
They're going to be the only ones left.
Wait, do you guys have Martin's in your area in Michigan? Is that a store you're aware of? Grocery store?
Martin's?
It's like a Kroger. They have these giant robots called Martys, and they stuck googly eyes on them, and they just wander around the stores, and they're always inconveniently in your way. They're basically giant glorified Hoovers. So that's just what I'm envisioning, just riding around the churches or giant Martys to clean up the.
You just turn up the motor from first gear to fifth gear if you want to be a Pentecostal preacher. That way they just move around really fast.
Well, guys, let's go and head into the next topic for today. It's been a while since we talked about social media on here. Social media is pretty central to everything that we do. Blackbar, we've been increasing our presence on Instagram specifically. And I think what's interesting about social media in today's world is that there's always new platforms coming out. Not all of them are hitting the same level of success that something like a TikTok might be. But you still have a wide range of social media platforms that are existing. Though Instagram, which is the specific topic that we're talking about today, is not it is not hitting the same level of popularity as TikTok is. It is still lasting. I would say Facebook and Instagram, especially the Meta suite in general. There is still a presence. There's still a lot of people using the platforms, and it still exists, even if it's not the next newest, biggest thing. Maybe not the youngest audience, certainly millennials and folks within, I think the 35 to 45 range is probably some of the most active users on Instagram. I could be feel free to correct me. This is 2023 at this moment, so if that changes, then that's not on us. But one of the things about Instagram is that Instagram is run in many ways on algorithms that try and leverage what content is being pushed out to get it to more people, get it in front of people. Algorithms, for those that don't know, just kind of doing a quick 101 here, algorithms dictate the order of posts that users see when they're scrolling through their social media feeds. Instagram has multiple algorithms for multiple of their tools, such as their feed, their stories, their explore page, their reels, their searches, etc. Where your content ranks on these visibility algorithms is in many ways determined by signals. So signals such as, where are you using Instagram from? Who is interacting with your content? What is their age? What is their, what are the cookies in their devices that are letting them know what are these people most interested in? These are all things that help determine where your visibility is on a social media platform. Instagram and other social media platforms change these algorithms on a regular basis. And wouldn't you know, just recently, Instagram had more changes. And I know as people, especially social media teams for churches, this can be frustrating. We're like, oh my gosh, they told me I have to make all these videos, and now videos are big, but I can do other stuff again. And I thought Instagram was a picture platform, and now it's a video platform, and now it's, so... Yeah. We get it. It's frustrating. But I think what you're going to see is these social media platforms are always working to improve these algorithms. And I think in many ways, we've seen in this year, they've been experimenting a lot with Instagram. We've seen Threads come out of the weeds. That's been kind of the competition to Twitter. Threads is directly connected to your Instagram account. Instagram has released Reels, which is directly competing with TikTok. And then even Facebook, you have Reels as well in their own similar way. I don't use Facebook as much anymore, so Instagram is really where I'm living. But you see a lot of these tools that Instagram is releasing to try and help compete in the modern social media sphere. A couple quick things that have been released this year, just breezing through a bunch of stuff before we kind of get into the meat. In this year alone, we've seen Instagram test longer reels to compete with TikTok's 10-minute time length. They've been testing polls and comments. They've been doing allowing public reels to be downloaded, again, like TikTok does. They've improved reel editing. They've introduced trend tracking to kind of see like what trending sounds and audios are going around. They've increased like post engagement and understanding what your awareness is on the platform. And they've also added transparency tools. And I was watching some videos as I was preparing for this, and they were talking about you can find out ways in which your content is being transparently advertised. And it'll let you know if your platform, because of what you've posted, is or isn't reaching transparency on explore pages and such like that. So they've done a lot of stuff in the past year, and I'm sure they'll continue to do more in 2024. There's a couple that as of kind of the October to November time frame still kind of being worked on in the December time frame that I wanted to bring up that I think is especially important for churches to keep in mind. So first things first, post shares are now more favored over post saves and explore visibility. So on Instagram, there's a feature in which you can save a post. If Caleb says, "Hey, I like turtles," and I'm like, that's really good. Thanks for sharing that, Caleb. I can save that for later for me to come back to, and on his page, that will register that as something that's worth expanding in people's visibilities. But now sharing posts. Turtles. Sharing posts about Caleb's turtle talk is going to increase kind of engagement over the saves. Something else, I think hashtags have always been maybe not an enigma, but like there have been so many fluctuating hashtag rules on social media, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. Some people, you'll see them just like flood their story, or they'll flood their comment sections, or they'll flood their descriptions with hashtags, just trying to get as many trending hashtags as possible. And sometimes that has worked in the past. Sometimes it hasn't worked. They've increased and decreased, and now they have started to kind of refine the hashtags. When you use hashtags that are related to SEO keywords, so search engine keywords, in your hashtags, in your captions, in your posts, that's going to help further target engagement and awareness with your target demo. So, guys, I know you guys have worked a little bit with search SEO keywords. I don't know if that's something you guys have had experience with as we've continued to grow our presence online. But SEO keywords takes a little bit more intentionality than just typing hashtag Caleb loves turtles. I'm
looking forward to the Nixie art. I'm sure we're going to see this week with me and turtles. Are you saying that the algorithm is looking not only for the SEO terminology in the hashtags, but also just in the body of the description?
Yeah, to some extent. So like, I think we've seen this a lot with YouTube, where if you're able to build the description, if you're able to build some of the first words, some of the first sentence or two in your YouTube description, like if it has highly searchable keywords that people are connecting with, that will help benefit people being able to find your posts. So if you're able to use those SEO keywords in hashtags, but also in descriptions, like that's kind of like, that seems to be something that they're really leveraging at the moment.
I have no idea who Visual Nectar is.
Yeah.
But it's the funniest thing I've read all day.
Yep, to class. Let's go.
So it sounds like writing your description specifically is going to be an important thing that we're going to have to pay attention to. Maybe you were not paying as well attention to. Usually we think about the content, not as much as the metadata, the data about the data in the description or whatever. Usually that's where you tell a story or just
Sure.
throw a couple of emojis. That's something that you should be intentional about. And there are plenty of websites. If you're just Googling Instagram trends or Instagram hashtags or whatever, you can see what things are trending. You can see what things get a lot of hashtags, what things get a little hashtags, and who's using those hashtags for what, and then intentionally using that text to push yourself on the algorithm. It's a good idea. It's always been a good idea. Now it sounds like it's a better idea.
For sure. 3 more thoughts real quick before I get back to making toys. Thanks so much, Visual Vector. Reels, of course, have been big this year. They have seen a lot of engagement, but right now in this most recent algorithm twist, we've seen a little bit of boosting of some of the other resources, such as carousels, images, etc., that are starting to compete a little bit better in the Reel space. So for a while there, all we saw was Reels, because Instagram was just trying to compete with TikTok. But now I think they're kind of rebalancing the algorithm. So I don't know how much you guys have seen, but I've seen a massive increase in carousels, especially for, creators that are, talking about business and social media and that kind of stuff. Like I've seen carousels be highly interacted with in that way. So something to keep an eye on. Something else that was released was the collab feature. I believe they released it back in June, but especially recently they allow multiple collaborators now. So on some of our recent Instagram posts, you've seen a couple of us in the collab, kind of collaborating on some of the reels, and especially the last one that we just posted. I've noticed that probably about 3 or 4 different people from my page specifically followed Blackbar because of the collab feature that was used. So definitely be using collabs if it applies. So like if your lead pastor has a page and then you post a quote on your church page about that pastor's quote, you can share audiences by using the collab feature. So definitely use that if you haven't yet.
Zach, can I talk a little bit about collaborations? Because that's actually something that we've been utilizing a lot through one of our clients through Blackbar Productions, Inc.
Absolutely.
We manage a couple different social media sites and stuff, and that's something that we've been using to great effect. We were able to take a client's page from I think it was 500 followers, Caleb, is that correct? And we're now over 2,000 in the past 6 months. So we were able to grow their audience, 3 times? 3 times 500 is 50.
A lot of it's
more
collaborations.
Than that.
Just business connections and personal connections they've had, sort of utilizing the network that already exists and build it. I mean, it's a no-brainer. If you have those connections, utilize them. It goes a long way.
Yeah. And then the last thing that I kind of wanted to share, which I found really, really interesting, is stories. The story algorithms have kind of really been tailored to like a closeness with your audience. So stories will most often be viewed by the people that are closer to you in relationship. So friends, families, people that are living near you, that you have a personal relationship and not just like some person around the country found me. Those algorithms will be refined by how often they view your content, how often they engage with your content, whether that's liking or responding or sending an emoji in response. And that kind of closeness variable seems to be really, really strongly coming about in stories. So it doesn't translate to the other algorithms that are hitting kind of the other elements of Instagram. But the fact that your stories are growing engagement based upon the closeness of people that are around you is really interesting to me. I think this is why we see a lot of pastoral accounts have like stronger engagement than like a church account. So like if Pastor A, who is at the Life Growth Christmas Church, if the pastor is having, sorry, I just threw that out there. The pastor is having more engagements in their stories with the same content that you're posting to Life Growth Christmas Church. It's probably because there's an extra element of closeness of humanity to that person. There are people that are following that account because they personally know and have a relationship with that pastor, as opposed to a church, which is valuable to have a large account for information and sharing and connecting with communities. But you're following a church, an organization, not just a person. So I think it's interesting to see that stories are having a reflection on closeness with the people that your account is being read as closest to. So.
Sure, that definitely makes sense. I think of the content that I see in the feed regularly is most often the people that I am like watching their stories pretty consistently, and not just skipping them every time they show up. Definitely plenty of them too. So yeah, that checks out.
Okay, well, as I've been aptly named, Yap to Claus is now, that is my my section. Nick, if you want to take us into the final topic of the day.
Yeah. Let me bring us from Yap to Claus's Instagram talk to the main topic we have here.
Let me de-hat real quick.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a distraction to anyone.
I was going to say, you made it pretty far with the hat. It's pretty hot under there.
Yeah, I mean, now my hair is all sweaty and all that jazz. But anyway, go ahead.
We need to get makeup over to Zach
makeup,
there.
please. Yeah.
So we want to talk about why church attendance is declining and what can we do about that. Something that we came across recently because the Carey Nieuwhof is somebody that we respect. We've referenced his book a couple times, especially when we talk about burnout and stuff like that. But he came across online with a blog post recently entitled
5 church attendance statistics every church leader needs to understand in 2024.
Thank you, Caleb.
Yep.
Yes. We took a look at it. There's the different stats in here, and we wanted to kind of take a different approach to it because Carey does a lot of stuff more with a bigger umbrella of just churches and church leadership. And obviously we talk about church media, church creatives and stuff like that. So we want to take a look at these different stats, the things that he's presented, and kind of give a different look, a different lens to what this data means. So the first statistic he shared was essentially the average senior pastor is about 60. And we combined that with the fact that his second statistic is boomers are dropping out and millennials are stepping up on all fronts. Caleb, what do you think this means to you?
So the average senior pastor being 60 years old, that certainly doesn't surprise me. But it seems to be a trend that's going up. We can see in 2020 it's 57, 2021 it's 58, 2022 is 59. Now we're at 60. It's getting older, about a year per year. I feel like there's a number of reasons why that could be the case. In general, younger people not sort of jumping into leadership. Is anyone a Christian? There are a couple people that are. A couple people watching, hopefully, as well. There's plenty of definitely young people in less frequency jumping into vocational ministry. I know. So one thing that's interesting that we know of in regards to that's weird. In regards to a ministry that both Nick and I do a lot of work with is the called department with the Assemblies of God. And the called department is in charge of specifically identifying and equipping people called to vocational ministry. So it's the called's jobs to find people that are called into ministry and get them into ministry. And often that's happening in middle school, high school. Sometimes that happens a lot later in life, finding schools and whatnot, getting them the education, giving them tools to do that. And what we're finding in general is that the number of people that report to being called into ministry over time hasn't gone down. People seem they're still going to camps and still having those experiences, still feeling that the sort of burden placed on their life. They're just not fully executing into it. And I feel like there's a number of reasons why that might be the case. Potentially, we've had a number of sort of widespread examples in the news over the past number of years, but I'm sure that's indicative of larger trends of sort of unhealth being expressed at a leadership level, and that becoming clearer and clearer, especially as younger generation. I mean, the younger generation is always going to be distrustful of leadership. I feel like it's growing even more and more so to be a trend in our culture. And that sort of position, being in a senior role, is less desirable. So people are going about their ministry, calling in means other than vocational ministry. That's an interesting thing to talk about. I don't know how much we as church media communicators can do anything about that. But I do think when you combine that with, very interestingly, the second stat that Nick mentioned being that post-pandemic, so obviously, a couple years ago we had this thing that happened, depending on who you ask, right? And after that thing, now that people are sort of coming back into the building, boomers specifically have barely come back from 2020 numbers. Gen X certainly have come back, but millennials by far are leading the charge at coming back into the building, which is interesting in that the millennials on average are in the building more often, participating in church service.
Yeah.
And also not participating in like staff leadership vocational ministry.
Yeah.
I'm curious, before I say anything, what do you guys think about why that could be the case?
Yeah, there's a worrisome trend that I think could be responsible for it. There are a lot of things that could be responsible for it, but one thing I'll mention here, it's very possible that we're not seeing leadership hand off, to the next generation. For whatever reason, it seems like perhaps the boomer generation is kind of keeping that role, and we're seeing less pastors enter into vocational ministry as like a senior role. There's also something that we shared a while back that came from a similar source about how during the pandemic we had, I think it was almost about a half of all pastors under the age of 50 had considered leaving the ministry, and a certain number, I think it was maybe, I don't want to say an exact number, but I feel like it was 30% had actually left the ministry for people under the age of 45. And so if we're seeing like somewhat of an exodus of these ministers, and then we're also seeing another generation retaining that authority and power and leadership, we're going to end up with this gap that we're having. And my worry is if that continues, what's going to happen when that older generation ages out, like in sense of retirement and stuff, and now we're left with a gap. Are we going to have the mentors and the people that would be around long enough to help bring up that next generation? Now, on a more positive note, I suppose this also could mean that the next generation that comes in and fills that leadership gap, if they don't have the influences of the previous generation, they may come in with new ideas and new thoughts and new decisions that they'd end up making. So it's too early to really tell, but I see that could be a thing, that we're just not seeing the leadership of the previous generation handing off the reins to the generation behind. And I know that's something that I've been taught as a Christian, that you always want to, bring up the people behind you too. It's not just you're not trying to put yourself on a platform that you'll live forever and, have no one around you. You want to bring up people with you. And so we'll see if this is a problem thing for the church, or if this is going to end up giving new leadership a new opportunity.
Yeah. It's like, is the success of your church rising and falling on one single person, the lead pastor, or is it rising and falling on the strength of the team and the community and ultimately the church as a whole that is coming out of this willingness to share responsibility? I think that's an important thing that we really have to keep in mind. I think this is an important thing. Like, this isn't just for lead pastors. I think this is as well for media folks and content creators and creative directors. Like, are you taking on all the responsibilities? Are you equipping and inspiring people around you to continue to fill those roles? I think, Caleb, just to kind of like keep it moving, there's two quick thoughts that I had. First, you had mentioned that millennials are attending but not stepping up. I think there's a reality. You look at any of our social media feeds, at least for our age group, there's a lot of people that are getting married. There's a lot of people that are having babies or onto their second or third baby, and there's a lot of people that are trying to just navigate maybe a two income household, or oftentimes a one income household. I think there are often times where millennials are saying, I want my family to be in church. However, I don't believe that I have the capacity to go above and beyond simply attending. So if I had to guess, that would probably be a pretty strong factor, at least in my mind, of why we're seeing the millennial numbers increase. And then the other thought that I had, I am curious to see how much of folks that are like boomers, folks that are Gen Z that are experiencing maybe some disenfranchisement with how we started to approach church because we went so digital, because we had to survive in an online space. Maybe they're disagreeing with the way that church is done because there's so much change. I don't think any of us are like, I think it takes a hard personality to really, really enjoy change. I think our most natural responses as humans is to push against change. So when significant change happens, especially when it's as personal to us as our faith and our faith communities, like it's really easy for us to buck against that. And hey, if I realize that if this is how church is going to be, it's easier for me to stay home and not to go out of my way, out of my comfort, out of my safety, or to reassemble with people that I feel like I have more of a connection. I've heard about a lot of people that have like midweek or midday groups with like older generations because that's easier for them to come out to than like a big, loud, bright service in which they have to, get into the public to do so. So it's almost like they're finding subsects of, how things were in order to kind of like conserve that rather than to be okay with how their church and their community is changing. So.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen over the past number of years, specifically with millennials, more liturgical, traditional churches, attendance being on the rise, as opposed to more charismatic evangelical things. I think there's a number of reasons for that. But I do think to an extent, people are longing for sort of like a tradition and a solidness of like, this has been this way for 1,000 years. And I'm tapping into an amount of history here, as opposed to, constant innovation. It absolutely can sort of break people apart from that. I also think, the only thing I'll say in regards to like, the only additional thing I'll say in regards to millennials coming in, but not climbing into vocational ministry roles. I think there's also something to be said about the economic factors at play. The economy for the middle class is not great right now. And pastoral roles infamously don't pay fantastic, like other than the top 1% sort of deal. So even if they were to be interested in pursuing a vocational role, realistically they're going to have to be bivocational and picking up a bunch of work, or at least having two incomes in the house, and doing that on top of pastoring is really hard. We know plenty of bivocational pastors. That's hard work, most certainly. And I could definitely see that being a difficulty. I do want to say though, in regards to what we can do as church media people, marketing, communications people in the spaces, generally speaking, not always, generally speaking, we often end up being the youngest person in the room in regards to either vision, in regards to communication, planning, new events, new programs, whatever that is.
Or in touch with the youngest in the room.
Right. Yeah. Right. What I have found both at the church that I used to work at and with a lot of the churches that I do work with now, that I find myself settling into almost like an ambassador liaison position often, where like I understand the internet and, young people. I never want to say that out loud.
The street youths.
Right.
It's immortalized forever now on YouTube, Caleb.
Right. But I'm sort of tapped into the culture in a way that often the pastors that I'm speaking to are not. So I think it's really important for us as creators who generally tend to be younger, who generally are more tapped into millennial or Gen Z, whatever sort of perspectives, to vocalize that perspective in your meetings, so that as the gap between your senior leadership and the younger members of your congregation widens, you can help be the communication between the two and ensure that the things that are important to the younger people are being communicated to the older people in a language they can understand.
I love
hopefully eventually we get more younger people in leadership. I do think that's a good idea. Maybe in every position of leadership in our country, that would be a good idea. But maybe we should move on to other points.
And maybe this will help us like transition to the next point. Nick, I want you to be able to kind of present the next point. But one quick thought, because we don't want to just talk about the negative and be doom and gloom in the podcast. Caleb had some good thoughts as well. And I think we also, for those that are in church creative, like the creative field, the production field, like we're in touch with the ability to use like the tools of the modern age. We're able to create art through what we do. We're able to leverage modern technology to help people see and experience like church and Christ and faith in a new way for the first time, maybe in their lives. How much should we have so much possibility to interact with younger students, with younger kids, that this kind of thing, the technology of the age, like they're already spending time, like they're spending hours of a day on this. How can we take their connection with this and make it that much more interconnected with their faith? And I'm not saying that they have to, what I don't want to say is that, we're going to make sure that they only experience faith through technology. That's not what I'm trying to say. But how can we leverage the technology of the modern age and the enjoyment and investment that they already are having with it on their day-to-day basis, and let them know that that can be an integral part of their faith in the way they interact with the world around them. Like, I think that's a really cool opportunity that media folks have to, bring up the next generation and equip and inspire people, so that when they transition out, when one day we become the boomers of the age, like how are we inspiring the legacy of people under us to continue and engage with church in a technological way? So speaking of technology,
I love what you guys said, because the fact that we get to be that to stand in the gap, so to speak, and be the bridge for the younger generation to the older generation is a beautiful thing and an incredible opportunity. And I think it just emphasizes something that we talked about last week of learning how to communicate to your pastors, right? Being able to speak to the older generation and understand their perspective, so that when we do communicate to them, we can do so effectively.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Moving on to the next thing that Carey posted in his blog is 27% of churchgoers now rely on church online. And here's a snippet that I want to read verbatim, because I feel like there's some things in here that are really important and will help paint the rest of this conversation. He says in there, while many pastors expected a significant and quick snap back to in-person attendance after the pandemic, the return to church was much slower than most hoped for. While some pastors initially switched off their online services to try to drive in-person attendance, many have realized that is a short-sighted strategy. And I think the statistic proves that. 27% is 3% or 6% shy of a third. It's at least a quarter of your churchgoers are online. And so it's 1 in 4, right? I'm not sure how much more I can paint that picture other than, there is a fourth of your congregation that is solely attending through an online medium.
Yeah.
And I know this is something that we experienced a lot while we were helping people navigate this change during the pandemic through our Discord channel. And something that we were very vocal about, talking about how, you can't just throw your church service online and call that an online campus. You have to have other things beyond that. And I think, the fact that you have a fourth of your congregation opens up a lot of other doors to what you can do online, knowing that you have that many people online. So what do you guys think when you see this statistic? What comes to your mind?
I mean, I think of Jay Crandall. We've had him on the podcast in season 1, I think twice now. He talked about having multiple different online strategies. One is an online strategy that is your online is your front door. That's the very front door that people experience before they come into the house of the church. Yeah. So that's here's who we are. Come and meet us in person. There's another that's like a blend where there are some ministry opportunities that you have online and in person, but again, in person is like the predominant push. And then I think the hybrid model, which I think we talked to him back in 2022, is really what their church is trying to push toward, in which they have a substantial discipline discipleship, not discipline, discipleship model that is sustainable in an online space that helps connect people with real folks, not only in the church, but also in church communities around them. So I think that those, this goes back to our digital missionary conversations. This goes back to the value of the online church. Even though I think Caleb, Nick, and I all have had dreams of what if online church is a larger entity than what it is? I don't think the current percentage is necessarily reflecting what we would have ideally hoped to have seen if the digital missionary model as as the Big C church would have been more effective in the current age. However, I think we are seeing the merits and the value that people are experiencing in being in the online space. Not only are we helping people experience church from home in the safety of their space in which they can process and experience their own, their own journeys, especially those that have been hurt by church, but also we're reaching people that are always traveling. We're reaching people that are like disabled or unable to come into a church environment. We're reaching people who maybe don't feel comfortable stepping into a social space that's in a church building. Like, I think there's just so many, like, I think these numbers, even though not larger than, let's say a quarter, are still showing that there is immense value within the church. So I think we get to lead that conversation. So if we see these numbers and say, hey, it is working, whether or not we feel like it is, I think that's, in my mind, that feels like a positive momentum.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think about how long I have to wait before it's appropriate to say "I told you so."
Well,
I mean, well,
there you go.
While some pastors initially switched off their online services to try to drive in-person attendance, many have realized that's a short-sighted strategy. Yeah, should churches 2 years ago we talked about this. I made a whole video about this.
Right.
Yeah, no, don't do that. People, 27%, obviously that's going to be less than COVID numbers, of course.
Yeah.
But 20%, that's 1 in 4 people are not showing back up into your building. And now it's been 2 years, right? They're not coming back. They're enjoying their. So, I feel like you've got 2 options. It's the same 2 options you did back when we put out that video 2 years ago. It's either you sort of intentionally design your services in such a way to be an advertisement for the ministry that happens in your building, to try to push people further or further in, continuing to have in-person only events, putting extra friction in place for people who want to experience your services or your church culture and environment entirely online. Or you invest into your online world, and for the people that are more comfortable, are only capable of experiencing your church community online, making sure they have an awesome experience and are able to interact with God in the same way, to the same capacity that people in service are. That requires more work. It requires more investment. But 1 in 4, that's like a member of every family that is now watching from home. And, I have a feeling that number's not going to shrink. I have a feeling that's going to stay consistent. I have a feeling that over 10 years, that number is going to grow. And it's just now more than ever, I feel like we need to continue to be experimenting, continue to invest, not just in the services that you're having online, but the church that you're building online.
Yes.
Building space for community, building opportunities for online people to meet other online people, assigning members of your staff to be thinking about this, who understand the internet and internet culture and, live streaming and community building and everything. Building out digital missionaries within your congregation. It's a whole way of thinking. It's a whole new, system. But that's 25%. That's not insignificant. It is definitely worth your investment.
Yeah. Perhaps take this another way. Remove 1/4 of your income, right? That feels like a lot.
Yeah.
This is
they're attending online. They did remove a quarter of the church. People watching online don't give. Are you crazy?
Well,
oh jeez.
I would encourage people to read the article, because there actually are some stats in there regarding about online giving too, and people who are specifically and wholly online personalities for their churches. Right. But yeah, I pulled that snippet out of that article, Caleb, because I felt like we'd have a really good chuckle about specifically the wording Carey used. I told you so. About being short-sighted, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Zach, go ahead.
I just didn't want. I just wanted to provide like one little, again, trying to provide like inspiration at the end of each of these pieces, because Nick, I didn't want to cut you off if you had something else to say before the final section. But I think like I think for those who have been trying to navigate online church, like keep it going. We're seeing that it's working. Like take these statistics and help understand them, be encouraged by them. I think that's thing one. And thing two, if you're really invested into your online community, you've got your lead pastor and your staff that are saying, hey, we also see the value in this. Maybe challenge yourself to say, how are we helping people go deeper in their faith and their relationships with this community and in their relationship with just God and discipleship and their disciplines in general? Like, keep going, continue to grow, continue to focus on what is the best way to keep people connected online. And, we probably won't go into the giving numbers or anything like that, but I think whenever you get people that are invested into a community and into a mission, I think that's where you can have a deeper layer of, faith. That's where you can have deeper questions and conversations that help people say, hey, this is something I want to be a part of, even if it looks different than how church used to look like. So, just an encouragement to keep that going, because I think we're seeing that like Caleb said, we're seeing that things that we have started to predict the past couple of years are coming true, and that's not going anywhere.
Yeah, it's really validating to know that our predictions turning out to be fairly true. Well, I'll have to go back and watch some
all the time.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! But one other thing I think would be really great is making sure that when you have your online campus, right, it's not just a Sunday thing, right? Church for in-person people tend to be a almost throughout the whole week kind of event, depending on what you offer your congregation. But I would encourage people that are investing into their online campuses to do the same. Start looking how you can have online small groups, that meet beyond just the Sunday kind of model. Figure out how you can keep your congregation in touch with each other throughout the week. I think these are, just natural ways to grow your online campus beyond just the throw your service onto YouTube every Sunday kind of model. If you want to invest, you gotta, like Caleb said, do the work. So our next statistic that Carey mentions, we're actually going to just kind of smash the 4 and 5 together. The fourth one is that the, quote, stable church is disappearing. 1/3 of churches report that they're growing while 45% are declining. And so kind of like to clarify this a little bit, what we're saying is that 1/3 of churches are reporting growth, while 54% are reporting the opposite, right? And so if we do some math there, I think it came out to like 18%. 18% of churches are basically saying, we're not growing and we're not shrinking. So you pretty much in 2024, unless you fall into that 18%, you're either experiencing growth or you're not. There's no real, these stable churches are disappearing. And then in combination with that, the fifth thing that Carey mentions here is that the online church is boosting church attendance, but it's still about half of what we had in, this says 2000, but I'm going to imagine 2020 is what that should say.
No, church attendance as a whole is half of what it was in 2000, including online.
Okay. Yeah. So we have, the increase of online church attendance, like you said, even our last thing that we're talking about, Caleb, that it's not as much as it was before. But then we also see that churches are they're not going to be too many stable churches into 2024, but we have growth and we have decline. And unfortunately, as the trend has been for a while now, most churches are in decline. So thoughts from you guys, when you hear those statistics, what does that immediately bring to your mind?
There's a lot of ways we can take this. There's a lot of ways we can take this.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of like how to view the different things we talked about today. And I think one of the things that's important to recognize is that there's a lot of folks that are maybe, I think because we're strictly seeing this as church numbers, I don't think we're seeing the other, let's say, what are other ways of ministry that people are doing outside of the church? And I wonder if there's a lot of folks that are like, these numbers are reflecting the attendance numbers, which I think we put a lot of stock in, probably more stock in than we should as a church community. But like, I wonder what percentage of those folks are still wanting to do altruistic ministry, faith-based service, just not within the confines of the church wall. Because, I think we've seen, in our culture, there's a lot of culture wars going on. Like there have always been culture wars, and there will always be culture wars. But especially right now, because maybe it's just the state of social media and how it's developing these massive different diverse and oftentimes head-butting communities. Like maybe we see the worst of the world just because it's being amplified more. Maybe not. I don't know. But I do wonder if we're not seeing the elements in which people are feeling called to help other people just without the burden or without the weight of like the tensions that churches are fighting over. I don't know if you guys saw recently, but I believe it was the United Methodist Church. You have to apply to leave the United Methodist denomination. And just recently, I think the number was 94 churches decided to leave the United Methodist denomination because of current cultural implications.
Church, not the member.
No.
Like the actual.
I would like to leave
the actual like denomination.
Yeah.
Like churches are a part of that denomination.
Wow.
They have to apply each year whether they're going to stay or leave. Or I don't think they have to apply to stay, but if they're deciding to transition out or separate themselves from the denomination, like if you're an Assemblies of God church and you want to separate from the Assemblies of God, I don't know what the process is for that. But for the United Methodist Church, they're seeing large numbers separate because of culture wars. And I just wonder like how many people are trying to avoid that and still trying to do good, still trying to hang on to their faith and trying to navigate what looks like in their own lives separate from a church community. Whether that's good or bad, maybe depends on the situation and the hearts of those that are involved. But that's the first thing I think of with seeing all these different stats back to back.
Mm-hmm.
Nick, do you have any thoughts?
No, I want to hear from you. Unless you need me to, because I do have one thing I can mention, but I wanted to hear from you first.
Caleb, bring the spice, bring the cinnamon spice. What do you got?
I don't feel like I have a good fix. I'll say, I do feel like a general problem that I'm seeing, across the church world. And I remember I had a conversation with someone recently where we talked about this. As a whole, is that I feel like churches are spending a lot of time answering questions that nobody's asking, and spending very little time answering the questions that that people actually are, and that by definition makes your church, the church, irrelevant. You are irrelevant to the cultural conversation going on. You are irrelevant to the solutions that are being provided, to the problems that are being discussed, that are being propped up. If I am not a Christian and I am looking to sort of improve my life, and you are offering me solutions to problems I don't feel like I have, and not willing to discuss issues that I feel like are important, like why on earth would I I be considering that? And I recognize, like Zach was talking about, culture is at war. There's no question, and it always has been. But I don't think you'll find anybody that won't admit to the fact that it's gotten worse. It's the war is bloody. And I feel like in an effort to sort of like play the middle ground, and not offend anybody, churches won't talk about anything, right? And I feel like there is such a need, such a desire, even if not, having a church sort of like, okay, this is our stance on this, and if you don't believe these things, you can't come. Please don't do that. I know some churches definitely do. But having space that are open for people to come and discuss, that is safe and controlled, and like voice sort of what they're going through, pastoring people, not just from a sermon, but like guiding people through these difficult questions and the topics and the culture that's going on. There's so much happening. People seem to be more burnt out and distressed and economically disadvantaged, and so many things happening, right? There's less faith in every societal system we have than I think ever in our history. It feels like it, definitely in all of our lives as millennials. And the church has such an opportunity to be the place and where the conversations can start, where we can really find good solutions to these problems. And I just feel like in in the name of maintaining an amount of status quo, in the name of maintaining a certain amount of, attendees and the tithes to afford the building, those are risks that we're unwilling to take. And I feel like they're risks that are needed, because obviously what we're doing right now doesn't seem to be working, in my opinion.
What was the thing you said earlier today? Zach, if it's not broke, make it better. But maybe perhaps in this case, there are some systems that might be broken that deserve a reevaluation. Because I know what I'm hearing you say, Caleb, resonates with me too. Because I feel like I've seen a lot of issues that, the capital C, specifically American church, have either engaged with once and decided to stop the conversation, or the opposite, gone so hard into it that we've forgotten that people are human. There's a book that I've read recently, that we're not sponsored or nothing, but I would encourage, honestly, anyone who calls Jesus their Lord to read it. But it's Grace, the Grace in the Gray by, and I'm going to butcher his name, Mike Donaghy. He was at SALT conference this past year, and I picked up his book and I read it, and I just think there's so much wisdom in that book about just how the church can interact with the people you agree with and the people that you don't disagree with. And if what we're doing right now is not working, then maybe it's time for us to reevaluate what we're doing and try a different approach. But yeah, I would recommend reading Grace in the Gray, because I think there's so much more in there that we don't have the time to go over, that I think could really benefit this audience.
I feel like, and this is very much anecdotal, sort of like personal experience, but as someone who reads a lot and is very, I'm a deconstructionist by default. I am constantly sort of tearing apart everything that I believe and figuring out why I believe it and why other people believe everything. And I feel like there's something to the fact that the Sunday morning service, or even when I'm at church, feels like the least safe place to have conversations about that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And it should be the most safe place to talk about our faith and what we believe and what is important to us as humans, what is important to us as family, what is important to us as Americans. That should be the place to do it. And it feels like the last place anyone would ever do it, unless they're in sort of like an environment where everybody's sort of on the same page. And then that's not a discussion. That's just, people agreeing with each other. Man, it feels like it's such an opportunity that, if those kind of spaces exist, I can't even imagine the cultural sort of implications down the line of what that can mean as the church being like an open area to discuss sort of these things, like it's not right now.
Yeah, and I think you have to look only as far as, what we have as records of Jesus' reputation in Scripture, right? People called him a drunkard, and essentially like a party goer, like a party animal or whatever, because of the company that he kept, And I think what's up?
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I'm just like, I feel like we. If we want to take, our Lord and Savior as an example of how to behave, I feel like our congregations might look a little bit different if we decided to love people that we find unlovable, and to bring people into our folds that maybe perhaps we don't necessarily find currently. Right? If we can be a little bit more gracious with everybody else, perhaps maybe they will give us the right to be heard. Because if we're not willing to listen to them, why in the world would they want to hear what we have to say? It's kind of a two-way street in that sense.
So, guys, I know we're hitting the end of the conversation here. As I said, I want to make sure that with each of these things, we're not just talking about the problems, we're also trying to provide solutions. I think you guys have provided a lot of, I hope that those that are watching have enjoyed the back and forth that we've had as we're trying to navigate these very heavy topics, because clearly this is stuff that we feel personally. I think just kind of like with these final 2 points, I'm trying to think of how we as creatives have an opportunity to change this. So, like, let's say you're listening and you're like, I agree with some of these things, but how am I, the tech guy who's not on, executive leadership boards, don't have I don't like just hang out with the lead pastor a lot. Like, what is the ways in which I can make a change? And maybe you guys have, I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about that as we close today, but one of the things that I'm thinking is like, we said it briefly earlier. We have an opportunity to have our pulse on the culture that's around us, and I think as long as we don't allow that culture to overwhelm our relationship with God, our relationship with faith, I think there's an opportunity that we can have those conversations, that we can be the one to foster some of the things that Caleb was talking about today. Like, what are the spaces in which you have relationships with people that only you can have those conversations with? And this is like the digital missionary model, right? This is, what are the spaces in which you have connection with people? Where are the opportunities in which you can help be a part of that community? And then how are the conversations and relationships that are coming out of those spaces helping you show others what it means to have a faith in God, whether or not that space is within the confines of a church building. I think that's kind of the opposite of the point that we're trying to hit here. Like, we have the opportunity to not only leverage technology and art, which is already a subjective, like it has a way to get around our walls, because there's an emotional component. Yes. There's a component that I think connects us to the spiritual foundation that caused all of us to want to believe this in the first place. Where the spaces that you're having those things and being able to have those conversations, who are the people that you can most directly impact on a one-to-one relationship, and not just posting about it on social media? And then finally, like, how can we leverage our giftings, our callings, our abilities, the things that God's given us, the things that we love to do, whether that's pushing a button, running a camera, creating a script, whatever that is. How can we help people see and experience God through those things? Like, we don't have to be stuck inside of a church building in order to create good Christian art. We don't have to be stuck inside of a church building to have conversations that help people feel better about what they're going through in their daily lives. We don't have to be stuck in a church building to help people see the hope of Christ. So I guess as we get to the end, like, those are some of the things that I just want to leave you with. Like the world is hard and it's unfair in a lot of ways. However, there is also beauty. And I believe fully that there's so much beauty in the foundation of who Yahweh is, and the relationships that we've seen, and the faith that's been built up over all these years. So it's a hard conversation, but don't lose the hope that we have. Like, that's the point of the season, right? There's hope, right? There's hope and joy and happiness. And I think the hardest part for us to do is that we have to decide to pursue that direction. It's easy to get caught up in the darkness. It's easy to get caught up in the heavy. But if we choose to pursue the joy and to pursue the beauty, if we choose to stay in the faith, like all of us, I believe, in this conversation are trying to do, like, where are the spaces in which we can go deeper with that? Where are the spaces in which we can connect on a level that truly gives us the shalom, the wholeness, the peace that we're seeking in seasons like this?
Yeah.
Well, guys, we're just about out of time. I do want to point out the comment, Caleb for president.
I feel like that. Let me guess, Caleb, that was the thing that you're like.
Yes, that was the comment.
Listen, you haven't heard my economic policies yet. Right? You hit me up afterwards.
You might change your mind after.
We will be talking about some of those details on this podcast in a public forum. Right. So
be on lookout for Caleb's personal podcast where he. Caleb's
ruins his career. It'll be great.
Nixie Art, can you make a Caleb for president?
Oh my gosh!
Piece?
Yes, can we? We are commissioning Nixie Art. If you haven't heard that joke, there is an Instagram account that's trying to mimic Banksy's style with stuff from this podcast. Nixie Art, I'm looking at you. I need to see in the next 15 minutes. A post about Caleb.
Oh my gosh, that's so tight of a time frame. Whoever this Nixie Art is probably works a day job, so that's going to be pretty difficult. Okay, we're going to land today. We've been a bit all over the place. And thank you so much for those that have been posting in the comments. I know there's been some interesting conversations going on. Keep those up. We love to have those. And hopefully we can be a space in which you feel comfortable having the harder conversations. Speaking of places to have harder conversations, we have a Discord that's perfect for people to hop over and join us in those conversations on. Like, even if you want to get into a connection with us on more of a personal level, in a personal DM or private message, or in a public space, like, we want to have this conversations with you, so make sure to join us on the Discord. Also, before we land today, I just wanted to make sure that for those creatives that are watching that are deep in the Christmas workload, like I know I am, I know some of these guys are too, I just want to remind you that in this Christmas season, that the work that you're doing is valuable. All the work and the effort and time that you're putting in is seen. I think that what you're doing and creating is going to help people be able to connect with God in a way that you may not even realize right now. So keep going. We're almost there. Christmas is less than 2 weeks away. I hope I didn't freak you out by saying that. But truly, I'm excited for what's to come in the season for everyone that's watching and joining us today. Whatever the next year is going to hold, we pray that it is life-giving, that it is centering onto God, and that it is an inspiring, educational, and encouraging to you and your own personal lives. And then last piece of housekeeping, no podcast in 2 weeks. So the next podcast will be in 2024 on Friday, January 5th, same place, same time. And for today, thank you all for joining us for the Blackbar podcast.
We'll see you next year.
Ho, ho, ho.